Hi everyone, I'm Dom Griffin. I'm a film critic and you're watching the Armchair Auteur. This is an ongoing video series I do where we talk about new movies, old movies, screenplay analysis, that sort of thing. So if you like movies and you like film culture and like to see someone pick it apart, please consider subscribing. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is the first video I'm making here in the new year. I took a little over a week off just to kind of like rest and recharge. I've mostly just been reading comics that I missed out on the last few months, watching a lot of old Ric Flair matches from like the late 80s, like early WCW era. And I lost 12 pounds since you saw me last. So it's been like a pretty good start to the year outside of like insurrection and everything else awful that's happening. So one of my favorite things to do as a film critic is that every time a year is over, you get to make big lists about the movies you liked the most, or didn't like the most, or thought about the most, or whatever. And this video is going to be a list about the 10 worst movies I watched in 2020. I do have two other videos like this planned coming up. One that's going to be the best new watches, like movies that are not new, but they were new to me in 2020. And then of course the actual movies I think were the best in 2020. But there's still a lot of movies left that I need to see, because stuff like screeners come to me late and movies get released late and all that stuff. So like I'm still gonna need a little more time for that, but I needed no such lead time to figure out the movies I hated the most this year because they were all pretty obvious contenders. So this is going to be the 10 worst movies of 2020 according to me. If you liked any of these movies, I apologize that I didn't like them. It doesn't mean I hate you or think you're a bad person. I just did not like these movies. And 5 of these movies I've actually already covered in videos on the channel this year. So as to not regurgitate my feelings on those movies because like they haven't changed, if anything they've gotten like meaner, I'm just going to link below a playlist of all those movies and run through them relatively quickly. And then we're going to get to the meat of the other 5 movies that I have not covered in the channel, but I think suck anyway. Those illustrious failures include Capone, the dogshit crime flick starring Tom Hardy from director Josh Trank; Irresistible, Jon Stewart's weak sauce political comedy that only grew dumber and more out of touch feeling as our tumultuous year continued; Songbird, the recent COVID-19 flick from producer Michael Bay that didn't even have the decency to be trashy in a fun way; Hillbilly Elegy, an equally lame film from Ron Howard that also couldn't even justify its pathetic existence by offering us a little camp for our troubles; and finally, Antebellum. Janelle Monáe really deserved better. So that brings us to the other 5 worst movies of 2020. I'll have more to say about some than others. Worst! First up, Doolittle. To start, we'll talk about the first press screening I attended in 2020, an event that should have tipped me off and foreshadowed how horrendous the year was going to get. We gotta talk about Doolittle, the first major movie Robert Downey Jr. chose to make after bowing out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, this movie was a massive failure, cost the studio a lot of money, and will be immediately forgotten. In the abstract, a new film based on Hugh Lofting's Dr. Doolittle books had the potential to be a new family-friendly franchise for the studio. Casting megastar RDJ in the lead role, populating the CGI animals with big-name voice actors, and culling the narrative from the more mature sector of Lofting's series all sound like good ideas on paper. But in the execution, Doolittle is somehow less than the sum of its basic moving parts. It is a confounding calamity of motion picture, splitting the distance between prestige drama pathos and Minions-level child pandering. Really, it shouldn't be all that hard to sell a movie about a doctor who talks to animals, but Doolittle was uniquely doomed from the start. You see, the studio hired Syriana writer-director Stephen Gaghan, a man who has not had a critical or commercial success in over a decade, to script and helm the project, despite his lack of experience with comedy, visual effects, or tentpole filmmaking in general. Early cuts were so disastrous, the film's release date would be moved multiple times, with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles director Jonathan Liebesman brought in to assist with reshoots alongside writer Chris McKay. Now, based on how scattershot, awkwardly stitched together, and intermittently humorous the final product is, one can only begin to imagine how unwatchable the film was before these revisions. As it stands, the film's positive points are as follows. John Cena voices a polar bear who calls everybody bro. Michael Sheen shows up as an evil doctor jealous of Doolittle's innate gifts as a healer. Antonio Banderas shows up for roughly 6 screen minutes to ham it up as a vengeful ruler. And, eventually the movie ends and the viewer is allowed to go back to their real life where they don't have to hear Downey Jr.'s insufferable fake accent. Everything else is uniformly terrible. The plot surrounding Doolittle having to save the ailing queen lest he lose his land and animal sanctuary devolves into a weird episode of House, and although the film's promising prologue implies the potential for a touching story about how difficult connecting with humans can be and the tragedy of lost love, it all ends with an expensive series of fart jokes. It's just scene after scene of Downey Jr. muttering to himself in what sounds like bad ADR. Like, was his accent initially somehow worse and they had to change it? And each of the barely animated animals take turns spitting unconnected one-liners. Sure, some of the jokes land, and it's not like there aren't occasional fun moments, but given how costly the production was and how much manpower went into this film's creation, the finished product is embarrassing and frustrating. A wasted opportunity, if ever there was one. A true shame. Next, we have to talk about Coastal Elites.
Worst!
Coastal Elites is the Jay Roach straight to HBO Max COVID dramedy that features a handful of sparsely connected monologues from a variety of big-name performers dramatizing life in the time of coronavirus. Bette Midler is absolutely unhinged in her opening scene. Eugene Levy's son plays an actor lamenting the complexity of trying to play a superhero. Issa Rae whines about Ivanka Trump, I think. I generally don't remember anything whatsoever from Sarah Paulson's bit, but Caitlin Dever closes the whole thing out admirably with a nice little turn as a nurse. It's just the equivalent of watching a curated Twitter feed from all your Resistance Lib friends with their Nancy Pelosi candles and wanting to jam a letter opener in each one of your eyes. I only watched it because, one, I thought it might actually be kind of funny because it was written by the guy who wrote In and Out, my favorite Kevin Kline movie of all time. And two, I figured if it wasn't funny, it'd be so bad I could make a funny video about it, but I hated it so much I wanted to pretend I never even saw it. And yet here I am talking about it to all of you anyway. I am truly sorry. Next, we can talk about The Last Days of American Crime.
Worst!
The Last Days of American Crime is a Netflix original movie that has exactly two things going for it. Mega hottie Edgar Ramirez is in the lead, and it's based on a Rick Remender comic that has a pretty cool premise. That premise is that the government has figured out a way to broadcast a signal to eradicate all crime by making the impulse to break the law psychologically impossible. So the comic takes that premise and tries to tell a wild sci-fi take on the last great heist, people trying to pull off crime before crime literally becomes obsolete. But oh man, this movie is dog shit. First off, it's directed by Olivier Megaton, the visually incomprehensible filmmaker behind Taken 2 and 3, so it's ugly, uninteresting, and has so little visual logic that it becomes painful to watch. Second, it's 149 minutes long, but feels like 249 minutes? Like, I can't remember the last time I watched a movie this fucking shitty and slow and badly paced and just unwatchable. And third, it's a movie that also features Sharlto Copley and Michael Pitt, two guys with a proven history of pulling out cool performances from otherwise bad movies, and even they couldn't squeak out some entertaining work from this horrendous production. If you follow me on Letterboxd, you know that I don't actually like giving star ratings to movies. Like, in my entire 5 years on the platform, I've only actually bestowed star ratings on 13 films. Of those 13 films, I've only given 4 films 1 star or lower. Of those 4 films, The Last Days of American Crime got half a star. It's fucking awful. Next, a movie I'm sure none of you actually watch or are aware of, a movie called Lazy Susan.
Worst!
Lazy Susan is about, no bullshit, a lazy woman named Susan who never got her life together. When we meet her, she's struggling to pay the bills, has a non-existent love life, and is dealing with her overachieving older brother convincing her mother to cut her off financially. Her only friend Corin, played by co-writer Carrie Aisley, is the only person who seems to understand her. The two have a flute and ukulele band together whose rehearsals are often interrupted by Corin's useless husband who can never figure out how to feed their kids without her help. Anyway, look, this is either the setup for a sitcom that doesn't make it to a second season, or an indie dramedy that isn't real enough to work as a drama and not funny enough to be a comedy. Oh, and Susan is played by Sean Hayes. Yes, Sean Hayes, the Will and Grace star, helped write this movie and thought the female lead role should be his. Now, it's important to note, Hayes doesn't play Susan for camp. This isn't like a drag scenario. It's not like a cis male actor playing a trans woman. It's just Sean Hayes playing a woman because it's acting and he thought it was a fascinating role to play. But Susan is barely even a character. She's a collection of negative character traits with zero redeeming qualities, someone so inert and stubborn that she fails to scan as remotely realistic, let alone human. This is one of those indie film exercises where the filmmakers felt that making someone as unlikable and difficult to relate to would mean the finished product would feel more authentic than the usual arcs people move through in conventional film. But the problem is, without that kind of arc, the audience is being asked to watch an insufferably selfish person be irritating for an hour and a half with little to no dramatic progression or catharsis. What's worse is that everyone involved still thinks this is some kind of a comedy, even though nothing here is remotely humorous. Like, if this is a Will Ferrell character where their obvious foibles were masked by how ridiculous and absurd the scenarios were, it could maybe be entertaining. But Hayes plays Susan completely straight. In the third act, there's a mild attempt to hint at more serious family dysfunction as the root cause for her issues, but it's never explored or unpacked, and the finish is too tidy to feel like anything other than exhausted screenwriters tying up a bad draft. Jim Rash is maybe the only cast member trying at all as Susan's ill-fated lover who is also a Jamboree owner. It's such a painful movie to watch with his presence, knowing a slightly better written version of this same story would work better with Rash in the role if we were for some reason insisting on having a misanthropic woman be played by a man from an NBC sitcom. What a waste. And last, but certainly not least, we're going to talk about John Henry.
Worst!
For a film named after an iconic folk hero, John Henry is both uninspired and uninspiring, a mixed bag and missed opportunity that's as confounding as it is infuriating. Director Will Forbes seems passionate about depicting toxic masculinity in black culture and the plight of gangs in inner cities, but has created a film less subtle than a Nancy Reagan speech and dumber than any number of pulp pictures he's awkwardly borrowing from. On its surface, John Henry looks like a simple enough modern update of the folktale, with Terry Crews as a hero caught in a walking tall like quagmire. This John Henry lives with his wheelchair-bound father, BJ, played by Ken Foree, and minds his business, a quiet pacifist who wants no part of the drama outside his doorstep. Despite his closed-off nature, we know he's a good guy because of the stoic way he hugs a dog who's been accidentally slain in a drive-by shooting. John Henry takes in a young woman named Berta on the run from a gang and has to exit his comfort zone, coming into conflict with skeletons from his past. From there, the only real kinship with the folktale comes from Crews carrying around a big-ass hammer in the third act, because it is otherwise a messy, overly stylized, shoddily written waste of viewing time. Forbes and co-writer Doug Skinner, in trying to adequately capture some of the malice inherent to gang culture, wind up luxuriating in a bleak worldview there's just no escape from. This isn't a situation where they have to set the stage with some dark and depressing shit so that later they can ultimately frame an uplifting story out of it. They just stew in borrowed visuals and repetitive themes that they take absolutely nowhere. If Forbes and the crew wanted to get together and take a big group photo where everyone was holding up placards that say joining a gang is bad, that would be a more profound and moving use of resources and time than this misbegotten faux B-movie morass that splits the difference between 70s blaxploitation and 90s G-funk music videos with none of the flair. It truly cannot be overstated that this is a movie where Chris Ludacris Bridges shows up midway through as the film's big bad, and he has a giant gold jaw brace surgically implanted into his face that no one acknowledges or remarks upon. It's criminal to have Terry Crews and a giant hammer going up against a literal James Bond villain and not have even an ounce of fun with it. Ken Foree, a legend in his own right, is the only person involved who has any idea what kind of movie this ought to be. He injects welcome humor, charisma, and vitality to an otherwise useless movie populated by people making stern, serious faces in lieu of giving actual performances. One hopes that a more talented filmmaker sees this movie and, remembering Foree exists, writes a better movie around him. That's the best thing that could come out of John Henry. Failing that, a lengthy apology from all involved might suffice. For whatever reason, this movie had like a really random period of time last year where it was very hot on Netflix. It was like a movie people were streaming in droves, and this was months removed from its actual release date, and I don't know why that happened. I don't know why people did that to themselves. I can only think that years from now, epidemiologists will finally find conclusive proof to tie that movie's brief bit of streaming success to, long-lasting effects of the COVID-19 virus. Don't watch any of these movies. I went through all of this so that you don't have to go through all of this. Please, whatever you do, don't let my sacrifice be in vain. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. Hit the little bell icon so you get notifications when I put out new videos. And if you want to talk about any of these movies with me in the comments below, I will be in the comments below. That's where I am most of the time. So thank you guys again for watching. I hope you guys are all doing safe. I hope your new year is off to a great start. I hope you didn't do anything fucking stupid to end up on a no-fly list in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.